Fedorov, I get it. Lidstrom, I get it. But bringing in Commie, like, what did you see in that? Bringing in Mike Commodore. Like, sorry, Mike.
Clearing the crease. Oh. Clearing the crease. Hey, hey, hey.
When you evaluated players, were you a guy you saw him once and you knew, or were you a guy who had to study a lot? And then on the back end of that question, who was the player that you're most proud of drafting and finding? And is there a guy that got away that you really had a good feeling about, but you didn't end up pulling the trigger on it, who turned out really good?
The guy that probably the closest to my heart there as a draft pick would be Chris Osgood, just because I was living in Medicine Hat. He was scouting. He was playing for the Medicine Hat Tigers, and we took him in the third round, and he went on to win 400 games in the National Hockey League. And I always say he's sort of we have 4 kids, Cindy and I. He was almost like my 5th kid there for a long time, because he played for the Tigers, and then he went, through the American Hockey League, and then I became manager. So we had a kind of a special relationship. So probably, and he's a goaltender. I was a former goaltender. He's a goaltender. So there was a lot of, he lived in Medicine Hat. I lived in Medicine Hat. We actually played ball hockey. I started a ball hockey league in Medicine Hat, and Ozzy played on my team. He played out, I played defense. He played out, he played forward. So there was a lot of reasons why I kind of took a shine to Ozzy. And then obviously he helped us win a Stanley Cup there in 1997. He was on the bench with Mike Vernon, but certainly he was in net in 1998 and 2008. So, but I think that you need good people, and when it comes to scouting, you can't go there one time and see somebody, maybe unless it's the number 1 overall, but you got to see them multiple times and in multiple situations, and you're trying to. I always say, I had 4 kids, and they were living in the basement, and they were 18 years old, and I wasn't quite sure how they were going to turn out, and I'm trying to figure out somebody else's 18-year-old kids from row 27 at the Moose Jaw Arena, or row 27 at the Medicine Hat Arena, or row 27 in Laval or Quebec or Sweden. So it's you try to get to know them as much as you can, and you do your interviews. But I think, and then from there, I really. Player development is such a huge part of trying to develop a player into his potential and putting them, and then, in the American Hockey League, there's those few that bypass, but the American Hockey League, they need good veteran players down there, but they've got to play, but they need some veteran players to kind of show them the ropes. And then when they get to the National Hockey League, you got to have some good leadership up there. So, these are all the things that you try to work on when you build a franchise, from player development, from scouting and pro scouting, because you need all those areas to be as good as you can at, to try to. It's such a competitive league to find that 2% edge.
Seaball, one thing before you go, just while I talked about the American League, not to cut you off. I've always said in my time frame that the 2 most successful organizations, in my opinion, were you guys in Detroit and the New Jersey Devils. 2 things that I saw in common, I guess I ended up being with both organizations, was that unless you were special, unless you were Scott Niedermayer, a Scott Gomez, a Nicholas Lidstrom, let's say, you played in the minors. Now, was that something that was there? Was that always like that in Detroit? Was that something you brought in, or how did that come about? Or was that always there in Detroit? I don't know.
Well, probably, I spent 8 years in the American Hockey League, 9 years of pro, 1 year North American League, and then Bingham. So 8 years of my career were in the American Hockey League with a struggling Detroit Red Wings in the 80s. Jimmy D had just come in, and I guess playing down there, I'd see, we'd have somebody play, 3rd round pick or 2nd round pick and play real well for 10, 15 games. And all of a sudden, bang, up he'd go to the National Hockey League. you kind of follow him, and he'd be on the first or second line for 3 games, and then he'd be on the third line for a couple of games, and he'd be on the fourth line, and then he'd be a healthy scratch, and back he'd come, and you'd see this 21-year-old that when he'd left a month ago, he was full of confidence, and when he came a month later, his confidence level was at 0, and you had to build him back up again. So it really impacted my thinking about the importance of the American Hockey League. And what's wrong with leading a league in scoring? They talk to a lot of people. Oh, should they go? What if you can go lead a junior league in scoring? Go lead a junior league in scoring. I don't think it's all bad. So I think that my time in the American Hockey League. And then obviously, talking to Scotty Bowman, and you think about the Montreal Canadiens and the Nova Scotia Voyageurs and those teams, and they probably, the American League team was probably middle of the pack in the National Hockey League. Just, you can't do it as much today for a whole variety of reasons. But certainly, I think time in the American Hockey League, and Kami, you were there, it's the greatest development league in the world. It's a great league, and lots of those referees go on in the American League, go on to ref in the National Hockey League, and there's lots of coaches that come through there. It's the greatest development league in the world. And I think that unless you're that special guy that can just go to bypass the American League, it's beneficial for every player, for lots of players, to spend some time down there. Instead of being 20 minutes if you're a forward and you're playing 18 to 20 minutes in the American League, why would you want to play 7-8 minutes in the National Hockey League? Why not be on the power play? And every important situation, you want to be on the ice. You don't want to be up in the press box or on the bench sitting and watching. You want to be actually in the action. So if you can do that in the National League, great. We put a Dylan Larkin at the age of 19 right from Michigan onto the National Hockey League. So I've kind of done everything. But my thing is, if you can play and you're a regular, great. If not, go to the American Hockey League and fine tune your skills, and your day will come.
Fedorov, I get it. Lidstrom, I get it. But bringing in Kami, like, what did you see in that? Bringing in Mike Commodore, sorry, Mike. What happened?
Here comes a bunch of bullshit right here. We go over this every golf trip. Ken and I have very different memories.
All right, I want the truth. I want the truth, Ken.
You like trees on the back end, and Kami's a tree. Takes up a lot of space. He blocks shots. True. He can defend, and you had the Lidstroms, and you had the guys that could run the power play, and you need defenders. And we thought that Kami could come in and be the defender. Didn't work out. Not everything works out quite the way you want it to work out, but certainly it was an experience for both of us.
It was that was actually very well put, Kent. I thought you were going to go a way different way. Thank you.
What was your version, Bobby?
That was actually all true. We'll save that for when Ken's not on. Yeah. We'll save the real version for later.